Welcome back to Flying Upstream. Today's episode features a conversation that will stay with you. Ada G Lloyd, our guest today, is an emotional chain breaker and a survivor, and she is here to share her story of resilience and the power of the human spirit to heal. We'll discuss the impact of trauma and the importance of breaking free from the chains of the past. This episode may contain sensitive topics, so please listen with care. Ada is the emotional chain breaker, the founder at Achieving Emotional Freedom Now, and author at The 7 Pillars of a Happy and Successful Life. She transforms lives by helping individuals heal deep rooted emotional pain from childhood trauma. Unaddressed pain shows up as imposter syndrome, trust issues, and addiction, as well as self doubt and more. By healing the root cause, Ada facilitates emotional freedom, bringing joy to your life and success to your business. Ada, welcome to Flying Upstream.
Thanks so much. It's an absolute delight to be here.
So, Ada, let's start with the heavy stuff that led you down the road that you walk today. You experienced sexual abuse as a child. How has this trauma impacted your life and your journey of self discovery?
It has been the 800-pound elephant in the room, if you will, because for so long, as a child, when you're experiencing something that feels very wrong and you don't know that anybody else is experiencing it, you feel like there's something wrong with you, which caused me to want to withdraw and to build a facade. And I did a masterful job of it. And confident and capable, and it all looked good. While back here I was broken and crying and in 1,000 pieces. And I was fortunate in that, well, first I figured out how to escape my situation by getting myself on a college campus 2,500 miles from home 1 month after my 16th birthday. And then a few years later, I received a life altering epiphany. You are not responsible for your father's choices, but you are responsible for how you allow them to impact your life. There were still no resources out there, but I jumped into the self help arena and looked for pieces that would help, and, gradually found some pieces that were in my basket of helpful things, but none of them were connected. And during the journey, it was a time to start connecting those pieces, and then an unexpected opportunity to light the path forward for others and talk about it in a really very brief way, but it opened a door to others long before it was still on the public radar. And then that led me through more years. And ultimately in 2009, I shut down my design business and began working with people. And gradually that led me more and more to focusing on how childhood experiences, childhood trauma affects us in adulthood in ways that we never recognize or anticipate in most instances. And so that's what I'm passionate about doing is helping people break those chains, because I know the difference between living in the pain of darkness and the light of freedom.
Yes, I can imagine it's quite substantially different. And I have to think too that you probably had some big challenges that you faced during your journey of healing from the trauma. And which strategies did you employ that you found most helpful?
Probably two or three things. One, as I delved into the self help arena, coupled with my own spiritual faith, the absolute understanding that we have the power to to change. That is the greatest freedom we have. And I think it's epitomized by a favorite quote that I have from Stephen Covey. He said, I am not a product of my circumstances. I'm a product of my decisions. And so whenever the circumstances were uncomfortable or stressful or not of my choosing, and there have been a whole bunch that were never on my bucket list. I'm sure there have been a whole bunch that were never on your bucket list also. But that's when we have the freedom to choose who we are, where we're going, how we're going to get there, and who we are becoming. And that gives us so much power when we embrace that.
That's so beautiful. That really resonates with me, and I think that's something that's so important for people to internalize at a very deep level, because it's helpful not just for the very heavy stuff that we encounter in life, but for everything, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I have a young daughter, and she'll say, this other kid did something, and that's not true. They're lying about me. And I tell her, honey, it doesn't matter if it's true or not. What's important is that you choose how you feel about it. You have control, you have the power. You can brush it off if you want to. It's hard to explain that to a little kid, especially when they're upset about something, but that is such an important lesson that we can learn, not just as adults who've been through traumatic events in our life, but for kids too. At every level, it's so important to really understand that, and that you can choose to have another life. Like you said, you can choose to be in the light and not in the dark and the shadows.
So let me address that a little bit in terms of your daughter at her age, and then in terms of how that impacts us later in life. So we all hear things from teachers, parents, religious leaders, community leaders that aren't particularly kind. They're kind of judgmental and perhaps even bullying. And hopefully, most of the time, we just sort of roll our eyes and let it roll off of our backs. But sometimes, for some reason, it sticks in our subconscious and it begins to define who we are. So, a couple of points here. One is nobody has the right to define who you are. Only you have the right to define who you are. And when somebody else, whether it's your daughter's bully or somebody's abuser or whatever, when they are doing their thing, it's all about power. Because if they can diminish you, they feel more powerful and more important. And generally, that matters to them because they're feeling a lack of power someplace else in their life. And that's really bothering them. And so, one of the things that happens is that message that you're inadequate, you're not good enough, that this is bad about you, or whatever, sticks not only in your subconscious, but it starts to play in the back of your head. And it stands between you and things that you want to do because it has diminished your self esteem, your self confidence. But it's a lie. How do you confront a lie and prove that it's a lie? You prove it with truth. So, giving you an example of a client who had earned a CPA but did not identify as a CPA because a bullying third grade teacher 55 years before told her she would never be a success in life because she wasn't any good at math. So
Mhm.
when we found out that that was what was keeping her from identifying as a CPA because she didn't feel worthy, we quickly took care of the worthiness piece. But then we had to address that tape that was playing in the back of her head. And I don't remember her teacher's name, but let's say it was Mrs. Jones. I said, okay, let's come up with 10 truths that prove Mrs. Jones lied to you. So I asked her some questions. I took a risk. How did you do in math in high school? I got A's. How did you do in math in college? I got A's. You're a CPA? Yes. Only about 15% of the people who sit for the 4 parts of the CPA exam pass all 4 parts the first time. How did you do? I passed all 4 parts. Have you ever bounced a check? No. Okay, 5 definitive things that prove Mrs. Jones lied to you. Go add 5 more. So you've got 10. When you hear that voice, I want you to say, Mrs. Jones, you're wrong. Because boom, 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 confront it with five truths. And gradually, Mrs. Jones' voice will quiet to the point where it effectively disappears. A couple of months later, she told me I had made more difference in her business than all the business coaches she hired. And I smiled and said, thank you, but I really didn't do anything for your business. What I did was I helped you remove what I call a legacy block because it goes back a long time so that you could show up in your business as who you really are. So we understand that big things are going to impact us and can and need to be dealt with. But little things can impact us in crazy ways we would never anticipate.
Mm. Yes, I can absolutely see that. I definitely have my own version of what people have said to me in my past that has stuck with me. And I like your approach of finding 10 truths that prove that what the person said was a lie. That's so powerful. And I can imagine even for children, younger
Mm-hmm.
children, that would work because everybody knows what a truth and a lie is,
Mm-hmm.
and they can easily do that. That's really beautiful. I'm curious to know too, in your own journey, how you found the courage to speak out about your experience, because it's so difficult sometimes when you're in that dark space, that deep shadow, to take that first step and then another little step and another little step. And how did you do that? And what advice would you give to others that may be struggling to come forward?
Well, the answer to that is one of my favorite stories because on a Monday night, the leader of my local church congregation called me, and this was long before it was any of this was on the public radar. Okay, and said, "Will you speak in church on Sunday?" And I said, "Sure," thinking faith, hope, charity, no big deal. And then he said, and I'm a single mom at this point with three kids, and my oldest daughter is making horrible life choices, and I have my own business. And he said, "You have more stress in your life than most people do. I want you to talk about how you deal with stress from a gospel perspective." And in that moment, my heart went, mm, because I knew I was going to need to make reference to the abuse. So I went and found my two younger daughters who were still at home and said, Frank called and asked me to speak in church on Sunday. And they rolled their eyes and said, "So what else is new?" And I said, "I feel like I'm going to need to make reference to the abuse that I experienced growing up. How do you feel about that?" Now, I'm going to announce something in front of 200 people in church they have known their entire lives that's not on the public radar. And they, to their credit, they said, "We're good with that, Mom." And so that Sunday, I started out talking about the normal everyday stresses we all experience: the guy that flips you off on the freeway, the boss that's nagging you about something, the teenager that's rolling their eyes at you. And then I said, we all have uncommon stresses. Things like divorce, delinquent kids, having been sexually abused as a child, health issues, financial issues. Named a half a dozen. And I've experienced all of these, and these are the strategies that I use to deal with them. That was my only reference to the abuse. Afterwards, I had three women come up to me. Two of them individually laid their head on my shoulders and, amidst their tears, whispered, "I thought I was the only one." The third one laid her head on my shoulders and just sobbed and sobbed and sobbed and sobbed and couldn't say anything. That was the day that I knew that even though my healing was not yet complete, I had an obligation to reach back and light a path forward for those who did not yet know it was possible. And so I began to do that along with raising my kids and running my business and all of that when I had the opportunity to do so. Because I realized that my story would help other people understand that their story was not unique. They were not the only one. Because even today, as much as it's on the public radar, I encounter and deal with people who have never told a living soul. And, or if they have, all too often, because so often abusers, whether that's bullying verbally or physical or sexual abuse or whatever it is, it's within the home. It's a family member, a friend, whatever. And if a child speaks up, way too often they're told, you're a drama queen. It wasn't that big of a deal. Get over it. They're diminished. And that diminishing of them is as damaging as the abuse itself.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I also just want to thank you, human to human, for speaking out about this. And I know that you're absolutely right. It's still today not spoken about enough that this is such a devastating trauma that happens to people, and people are still not getting the support that they need. And I think even your story of speaking about it in church, just that one little bit, just even saying the words, evoked such an emotional response from those three women. And think about all the other women that didn't come up to you, that
Mm-hmm.
that kept it pushed down. So thank you so much for speaking out about this. I think that's really, really critical. I'm curious to know about the program that you developed to help others heal, achieving emotional freedom, in which you help people heal from childhood trauma. Um, and is it, if it's possible for you, then it could be possible for anyone. And tell us a little bit about what that program's like and how you work with people.
So it's a 12-week program, and the first 7 weeks are devoted to healing. We start by identifying all of the different things that constitute abuse and enabling. And that's a lot longer list than people tend to think of. And everything they do with all of the written work that they have is for them. If they want to share it with me, that's fine. They don't need to share it with a living soul if they don't want to. But it's incredibly important that they be totally honest because it's for them. And so, you know, what kinds of abuse have you experienced? Who are your abusers? Choose the one that still has the biggest impact on your life today. And then we're going to start by separating out their stories, your abusers and enablers' stories, from your story. Your story is what you experienced, how you felt about it then, how you feel about it now looking back on it, and how you feel about what was said to you. Not what was said to you because that was a lie, but how you feel about it. That's your story. Everything else is somebody else's story. And one of the things that we hear it most often in domestic violence, but it underlies every type of abuse. If you hadn't done this, I wouldn't have had to do that. You are never, ever responsible for somebody else's choices. So we're separating out, they've done a masterful job of commingling their choices with your story to make you responsible for their choices. You're not. So, what we need to do is to separate out their stories from your story. And we do this, it's like a puzzle. If you're doing a puzzle and you find out there's a few pieces missing, you've still got a pretty good idea of what the puzzle looks like. So, we look at what was going on in your abusers and enablers' lives at the time they made those choices. It was not to condone in any way the choices they made, but to understand it was about them. It wasn't about you. And so we separate out abusers, enablers stories from your story. And then we again finalize, if you will, your story, owning your story without all of the rest of this extraneous stuff connected with it that doesn't belong in it. And then there's still the voices. And so we go through the process of silencing the voices. At that point, you really have emotional freedom from the past, at least in terms of that abuse. And then we transition into 5 weeks that are about the future. And that we start with the 7 pillars of a happy and successful life, which are personal, your relationship with yourself, physical, everything about your health and your body, emotional, which is largely about resiliency, spiritual, which is however you define spiritual, professional is whatever brings money into the household, financial is largely about stability, and then relationships of all kinds. And when you know what success looks like to you in each of those areas, then you can create your unique definition of success. This isn't about how mom and dad or society or anybody else defines it. It's how you define it for yourself. And then with that, you can use that as a mindful filter to know when to say yes and when to say no. Because most of us say yes when we know we should have said no. And when that happens, the things that are most important to us to accomplish get pushed on the back burner. And it's always manana. As soon as I do this for so and so that I promised to do, I will do this for me that I promised to do. But those things tend to get pushed off. So we need to learn how and when to say yes and how and when to say no, including to ourselves. And then we can use that to create a roadmap to know where we want to go and how we're going to get there. So in 12 weeks, we transition from darkness and pain and being defined by somebody else and feeling responsible for what we experienced and the trauma that we endured to breaking the chains of that and experiencing freedom and having a path forward that is truly our path. And along the way, you now have a tool belt. So all of those other issues, past, present, or future, you know how to deal with.
I yes, yes to everything you're saying. What I want to especially call attention to is the fact that success is different for everybody. What I grew up with, and I think many people did, is that success means you go to school, get good grades, get into a good college, get a good job, married, have kids, buy a house, and so on. That is success. But there is no one size fits all. And
Mm-hmm.
it's completely ridiculous to think that one way of living would work for everybody. It doesn't even make sense. But that's what has been fed to so many of us, and now we're, you know, many people are going through an awakening, I'll call it, to realize that that just doesn't work. And not only do we not want that, but I can't live that way anymore. Right. I know that's personally what happened to me. I felt like I cannot continue on this journey. And so the unconventional thing about this is really digging deep, as you said, to find what that success means for you. And I love how you break it down into the different pillars because it is different, right? So, for example, I grew up in a culture where the clothing I wore was very important. Where I went to college was important. There was an image of our family that, and almost like a brand that I had to uphold. That was a lot of pressure for me. And now, many years later, it's just changed, right? I have been wearing this sweater for a number of years. It's fine. I don't need the latest, greatest sweater. It's just fine for me. And I don't really have a preference where my children go to college as long as they're happy and getting some kind of education. It's all fine for me. So I feel like I have been able to start myself on this journey, and that's essentially what our podcast is all about. So I really wanted to highlight that and thank you for putting that out there to help people on their journeys as well. And I wanted to circle back to some practical things that you can advise for our listeners. So we know that you believe that these voices of inadequacy can be quieted. Can you share some practical strategies for silencing those inner critics and cultivating self compassion? So, how can listeners learn to recognize and challenge these negative thought patterns when we might not even realize they're there to begin with?
So I have what I call my yellow pad strategy. It doesn't mean you have to use a yellow pad, but let's say you're feeling angry or frustrated, some negative emotion that you know is causing grief or angst or being stuck in your life, causing things you don't like, and you don't know where it's coming from, and you don't know what to do about it. At the top of the yellow pad, write a question with a single objective. So, why am I feeling angry? It can't be angry, confused, etc., etc., etc. You can do it multiple times, but Focus on one thing. And then just start doing a brain dump and do not allow yourself to edit. The first three or four things that come up, your reaction is going to be, well, that's stupid, or something of that nature. And you're going to want to disregard it. Don't. Write it down. Someplace around four or five, something will pop up in your brain and it'll go, that's it. When that comes up, continue the brain dump without editing about everything that comes up about that. It may take you 15 minutes, it may take you 3 hours. It doesn't matter. Do it in a safe place with an open-ended time frame. When you're done, you will be physically and emotionally exhausted. Take a nap, go to bed for the night, whatever. And a couple of days later, go back and read what you have written. You will get a great deal of insight about what's going on. Once you have that insight, you can then develop a strategy to deal with it. So, for example, in my case, I had an issue around rejection, and I would feel rejected in all sorts of things. And I knew that professionally it was really hurting me and holding me back. So, when I did that, I think it was number 4, was you view your father's choice to abuse you as the ultimate paternal rejection. And then things that followed, well, your mother's denial was the ultimate maternal rejection. After a 20-year marriage, Max decided he wanted a divorce. That qualifies as rejection. Your oldest daughter is making choices that are contrary to everything she's been taught. That constitutes rejection in your role as a mother. Think you have a role around, an issue around rejection? Yeah. And so that allowed me to create a strategy that when I felt those feelings of rejection coming up, it would allow me to step back and to say, okay, is this about what's really happening in the moment? Or is this about bringing up all of those feelings from the past? And 95% of the time, excuse me, it would be about bringing up things from the past. And so, then I could go through, a process to let go of that. And for a couple of years, that had to be a very conscious process. And then it became, pretty much automatic. And that's been like 20 years ago. And today, every once in a while, rejection will pop up. And it's like, oh no, are we really going here again? Is this about now, or is this the old stuff trying to come back and hang out? Oh, it's the old stuff trying to come back and hang out. Goodbye. It's when you understand where that's coming from, you can develop a strategy. Where it's coming from is as individual as you are. And the strategy needs to be as individual as you are. But that process is highly effective for most people.
Yes, it sounds like giving yourself the time uninterrupted and the space to be alone with your thoughts and keep digging through multiple layers is really the key, because there's always a surface reason, right?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, something didn't go my way today, someone yelled at me, but that's not really the reason, is what you're saying. I'm curious to know if that's similar to the legacy choices that you've mentioned, which are patterns and beliefs passed down through generations. Is this the
Well,
same?
yeah. So we have two things here. Abuse tends to be generational, and what you grow up with is your normal. So if that is not disrupted and you don't in adulthood take the opportunity to say, wait a minute, my normal is not healthy, it's not productive, it's not necessarily normal for everybody else. Let me see what I can do to change my normal and reinvent my normal and break the chains to the past. And that's what When you look at domestic violence, in most instances, both perpetrators and victims grew up in an abusive environment or they saw violence growing up. That's their normal. They're gravitating towards somebody who has the same normal. So, in terms of legacy choices are a little bit different than that because those are the choices that we make that we think are conscious decisions without recognizing that that decision is impacted by something in our past. So, for example, uh, the example I told you earlier about the client who was a CPA, when she made the choice to not identify as a CPA, she did that because that's what felt right to her. You know, she looked at everything about her business and what she was creating, and she just chose not to identify because it felt right to her. She didn't realize that the reason it didn't feel right was because of the legacy of what that third grade bullying teacher had told her.
Mm,
So, those are the choices that we think are conscious, but are influenced by something from our past without our awareness of how it is impacting us.
mm, very interesting. You've talked a lot about each person doing their own individual work, looking within, really examining where voices are coming from in your from your past. And I'm curious to know, what part does community play in this, right? Because it's very individualized and personal. Are you suggesting that we share this with a larger group, or do we kind of keep it in?
Yes and no. Um, the most important thing is to share it in a safe place with safe people. So, keeping it in allows you to say, I'm defined by somebody else's choice. I'm broken. I'm not good enough. I can't let anybody see that. And that's what so often society has encouraged us to do. And so it's important that we say, this is my experience, but it doesn't define me. But because we are vulnerable to judgment, and that is sort of like picking at the scab that's trying to heal and ripping it off, it's important that we do it in a safe place. So, two things. I've got a free community on Facebook, the Chain Breakers, and that's designed to be a safe place for people to share. The other thing is, I really talk a lot about trust. And if you want to share with a family member or a friend or whatever, and this applies not just to abuse, but to anything that is emotionally significant to you in any way. Trust on a superficial level. When you see that honored, trust a little bit more. When you see that honored, you can trust a little bit more. But trust incrementally as you see the present level of trust being honored. Don't jump off the, you know, 30-foot diving board, when you've never even stuck your toe in the water before. So, and if you see trust violated, then it bounces back to the superficial level. And, if that, it would be very risky to try taking it down again. So, my answer is yes and no.
Well, I appreciate that. And I think this fits in well with what you've been saying, is that this approach is personalized, but there's also a framework to work with it. And I want to thank you. This has been so enlightening. And we're winding down here a bit. So we've got one last question for you. What are some of the most important tools and resources that you recommend to individuals on their healing journey? And how can listeners find support and build a community of healing?
So, two or three things that I would suggest. The first one is recognize that you're not responsible for anybody else's choice under any circumstance, regardless of what they're telling you, regardless of what society is telling you. One of the things that can help you begin to deal with some of your emotions is to journal, is to write about what you're feeling and to write about your experiences. One of the things that I think can be really helpful is to have a dialogue with yourself. So let's say that, like in my case, my father was my sexual abuser and my mother was his enabler. Is what would I like to have been able to say to my father or to my mother that might have changed that? Not that it was my responsibility, that was their choice, that was their responsibility. But is there something I could have said that might have caused them to look in the mirror and make a different choice? Um, and just kind of engage with a little bit of wishful thinking, because that again is going to help you get your emotions out on a different level, more the emotions of that child, rather than just because what we want to do is conventional therapy tends to go around and around and around in a circle about facts. What I do is breaking that circle, it's about feelings. Anything that helps you break that circle and focus on feelings. You don't want to live there, but you need to acknowledge them and honor them because they've been diminished. You have been diminished, either verbally or by implication, by the choices that somebody else has made, whether it's garden variety bullying or very horrific abuse. And I hope that makes sense to people. They can find me as Ada G Lloyd on Facebook. They can find me as Ada Lloyd on LinkedIn or on YouTube. And or on Medium. But what I would just absolutely beg of your listeners is, I'd love to have you reach out to me, but find the right person for you. And if somebody honors your feelings and is respectful of them, there's a high probability they're the right person. If they judge or dishonor them in any way, run as fast as you can because they are not the right person for you.
Those are wise words, definitely words to live by. Thank you, Ada, so much for your courage and your openness and sharing your story with us today. Your message of hope and healing is truly powerful. And for those of our listeners seeking support on their healing journey, you can find more information about Ada Lloyd and her work on her Facebook page, Ada G Lloyd. We'll include the link in the YouTube description and the show notes. And to all our free spirits out there, remember that healing is possible. Keep questioning, keep challenging, and as always, keep flying upstream. Until next time.